Hi. I pressed the gun to my cheating wife's lover's head, watching his eyes widen in sheer terror. He was shaking, practically falling over himself, whimpering like a cornered animal. Please, don't hurt me. I'm ready to make it right. I have money, I'll give it all. He scrambled to the desk, throwing open a drawer, hands fumbling to pull out stacks of cash like that was going to fix everything. I took a breath, keeping my grip steady, feeling the weight of every lie, every hidden text, every excuse she'd thrown my way like it was yesterday. This man was the reason my marriage was a sick, twisted joke, and now he had the nerve to beg for mercy. I looked him dead in the eye and, with a voice as cold as steel, said, "You should have thought twice before jumping into bed with a married woman." Watching him break down in front of me, I could almost feel a sick satisfaction, but deep down, a part of me knew the real betrayal lay elsewhere, at home, with the woman I thought I knew. I lowered the gun just enough to let him breathe, but I wasn't done. He'd leave town tonight, or I'd finish what I started. No more pretending. That night had turned my life upside down, shattering my reality piece by piece. And it all started a month ago, with a single late night and a feeling I couldn't shake. As I walked out of that scumbag's apartment, I felt a strange sense of calm. The kind of calm that comes when there's nothing left to lose. The rush of adrenaline was fading, and all that remained was a hollow pit where my marriage, my trust, and my life used to be. I slid the gun back into my coat pocket, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. But just as I stepped into the hallway, a sound stopped me cold, a soft gasp. I turned, and there, peeking from behind the door of the next apartment, was a woman, wide-eyed and frozen. She must have seen everything. Maybe she thought I'd hurt her next because she stammered, I didn't see anything. Her face was pale, almost ghostly. I didn't have the time or patience for witnesses, but I didn't want to end up with cops on my tail either. I took a step toward her, and she backed up, looking ready to bolt. "Look," I said, keeping my voice low, "this isn't your business. Forget you saw me here, and I'll forget I saw you." I didn't break eye contact, and after a tense second, she gave a quick, terrified nod before slipping back inside her apartment, shutting the door so fast I heard it click. As I made my way out of the complex, I took in the irony of it all. Here I was, forcing a stranger into silence while the person I should have trusted most in this world was lying to me with every breath. The calm I'd felt leaving the guy's apartment twisted into a quiet, burning rage. Now it was time to go home and see if Madison had the guts to look me in the eye after everything I'd discovered. And tonight, I wasn't letting her dodge a single question. When I got back, the house was dark, but I knew she was inside. Her car was parked out front, looking like it hadn't moved since her so-called late-night meeting. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before turning the key. Every second stretched out, each one an agonizing reminder of what I was about to face. The moment I opened the door, she came out of the living room, her face tense. "You're home late," she said, as if we were a normal couple, like I hadn't just found her lover and held him at gunpoint. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if she were the one feeling vulnerable. That one gesture made my blood boil. "Yeah, well, some of us had a busy night," I replied, my voice dripping with a sarcasm she couldn't miss. She squinted at me, looking for a clue, any hint of what I knew. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her a chance. "You want to tell me what's going on, Madison?" I asked, staring her down. She froze, her hand halfway to her mouth, her face shifting from surprise to something darker. I wasn't going to let her talk her way out of this one. "Don't even bother lying," I added, watching her eyes widen. I know everything." Her mouth snapped shut, and for a split second, I thought she might actually admit it. But instead, her expression hardened. "Oh, really?" she said, crossing her arms. "What exactly do you think you know?" Her voice dripped with contempt, and I could tell she was ready to twist this back on me, make me out to be paranoid, irrational. She'd used that tactic before in small arguments, flipping the blame until I was the one apologizing. Not tonight. I know about Darren. I know about the nights you worked late. I know about the texts and the calls, and don't you dare act like I'm making this up. I stepped closer, and she didn't move, just kept glaring at me with a look that felt more like defiance than guilt. Go ahead. Deny it, Madison. Tell me I'm wrong. Her face cracked, but it wasn't shame or regret, it was anger. She laughed, sharp and bitter. So, what, you followed me? Stalked me? Dug through my phone like some insecure maniac? Her voice was razor sharp, and in that moment, I realized she wasn't sorry. Not for what she'd done, and definitely not for hurting me. No, she was mad that I'd figured it out, mad that her game was over. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'd come home thinking I'd get some tearful apology, some pathetic explanation, but all she was giving me was attitude and blame. It was like she didn't even care. Yeah, she shot back, stepping closer, her eyes daring me to do something about it. Well, maybe if you hadn't been so damn boring, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. Her words hit like a slap, but I wasn't about to let her see me flinch. So it's my fault now? I asked, clenching my fists. It's my fault you're a liar and a cheat? Oh, grow up, she snapped, rolling her eyes. People get bored, John. People want excitement. You think you're the only one in this marriage? Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of burying yourself in work, we wouldn't be here right now. Her words twisted inside me, a dark anger building until I couldn't keep it in. You want excitement? I said, my voice calm but deadly. Fine. But remember this, Madison, there are consequences for what you've done. I might have let Darren off easy, but don't think for a second you'll get the same. She laughed again, that bitter, hateful laugh. Consequences? What are you going to do, John? Cry some more? Shout a little louder? I stepped back, suddenly seeing her for what she was, a stranger. A stranger who had the nerve to tear my life apart and laugh about it. But as furious as I was, I knew there was no point in saying anything else. She wasn't going to admit her mistakes, and she definitely wasn't going to apologize. Without another word, I turned and walked away, feeling her cold stare on my back. There was no going back from this. Not now, not ever. And the next decision I made would change everything, for both of us. As I left the house, I didn't look back. My head was spinning, my heart pounding, but I couldn't stand another second in the same space as her. The late-night air hit me like a slap, cutting through my rage, and suddenly I found myself driving aimlessly, mind racing in 1,000 directions at once. Every corner I turned, every red light I stopped at, brought flashes of our life together, moments that now felt tainted, hollow. And with every memory, the fury grew sharper. After a while, I pulled over, parked on the side of a quiet road, and sat there, just breathing. How did things get here? 1 minute, I was a husband, a partner, building a life with the woman I loved, and the next, I was in a stranger's apartment, pointing a gun at a man I'd never met. I closed my eyes, my hand instinctively tightening around the grip of the gun still in my pocket. Then my phone buzzed. A message. From her. Madison, don't you think we should talk about this? You walking out isn't solving anything. I stared at the screen, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Was she really trying to make this sound like some kind of misunderstanding? Like I was in the wrong for leaving? My fingers shook as I typed a response. Me, talk? You mean more excuses, more lies? There's nothing left to talk about. I hit send, shoving the phone into my pocket, but not even a second later, it buzzed again. Another message. This one was different. Unknown, I know what you're going through, John. I've been there. If you want to know more about your wife's secrets, meet me at the corner of 5th and Harrison. Midnight. My mind reeled. I didn't recognize the number, and the idea of someone knowing what I was going through felt surreal. A prank? A sick joke? But something about the message tugged at me, something that felt like a dangerous curiosity. What secrets did Madison have that I hadn't uncovered yet? Midnight wasn't far off, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was driving again, heading for the address. When I arrived at the corner of 5th and Harrison, the street was deserted. A lone street lamp flickered, casting eerie shadows, and I wondered if I'd fallen for some elaborate trick. But just as I was about to leave, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, around my age, with short, dark hair and a knowing, almost sympathetic look in her eyes. "You're John, right?" she asked, stepping closer. Her voice was calm, almost familiar. "Who are you?" I asked, feeling my guard go up. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows what it's like to be betrayed by Madison," she said, crossing her arms. "I know it sounds crazy, but I used to be in your shoes. Madison and we had a friendship years ago. That is, until I found out about her affair with my husband." Her words struck like a punch to the gut. Madison had been in an affair years before? With a married man? She hadn't just cheated on me, she'd done this before. The woman looked away, as if reliving her own pain. "I wanted you to know, because, when it happened to me, no one told me the truth. I spent years thinking I was going crazy, trying to make sense of why things fell apart. I figured you deserved at least that much." For a moment, I was speechless, the weight of her words sinking in. All these years, I'd been with someone who'd done this to others, who had no regard for the destruction she caused. My hands trembled. Madison wasn't just a liar, she was a serial cheater, leaving broken lives in her wake like it meant nothing. The woman turned back to me, her face unreadable. "But there's something else. Madison doesn't just cheat. She has a pattern. And if you aren't careful, she'll make you the villain in this story." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a sense of dread creep over me. "She'll twist the truth, make it look like you're unstable, dangerous even. I know because she did it to me. My husband, he didn't believe a word I said. Madison convinced him I was unhinged, obsessed. And before I knew it, I was out of my own home. She's good at it, John. Manipulating, shifting blame, it's her specialty." Her warning hung in the air, chilling me to the core. Could Madison really do that? But as I thought back to her defiant, mocking face when I confronted her, it wasn't hard to believe. She'd already tried twisting the narrative, making me the bad guy for spying on her. And if she was capable of that, then who knew what she'd say or do next? I nodded, trying to hold on to my composure. "Thanks for telling me," I said, barely able to find the words. The woman gave me a sad smile, her eyes heavy with a pain I recognized. "Be careful, John. She'll stop at nothing to protect herself. You need to make sure you're the one in control here." She reached into her bag and handed me a small USB drive. "There's proof. Messages, photos. Things I gathered over the years. They might help you." I took the drive, feeling its weight in my hand. It felt like a weapon, like the missing piece I needed to fight back. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. She nodded, taking a step back into the shadows. "Good luck," she said, and with that, she was gone, leaving me alone under the flickering streetlight. Back in my car, I turned the USB drive over in my hands, wondering what secrets it held. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and a new, unsettling determination. Madison wasn't just cheating on me, she was a master manipulator, and if what this woman said was true, I was up against something darker than I'd ever imagined. That night, I sat in the car and plugged the USB into my laptop, ready to finally see the extent of the lies I'd been living under. And as the files opened, revealing photo after photo, message after message, the reality hit harder than I'd prepared for. This was more than an affair. Madison had a history, a habit of wrecking lives, of making everyone around her believe she was innocent while she tore people apart. And now, it was my turn to fight back. I wasn't going to let her do this to me. As I drove home, the pieces of a plan started to fall into place. Madison had pushed me into a corner, but this time, I was coming out swinging. She'd built her world on lies, and I was about to tear it down brick by brick. I barely slept that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the USB drive and a growing list of realizations. Madison hadn't just made a mistake, she'd built a life around betrayal, weaving lies as effortlessly as she wove words. But now, I had something she didn't expect, proof. And I had a plan to make her see that her days of manipulation were over. The next morning, I made her breakfast. Nothing elaborate, just eggs, toast, and coffee, but I played the role of the dutiful husband, and she looked surprised, almost wary, as she sat down across from me. "Morning," I said, setting the plate in front of her with a calm I barely recognized in myself. She looked at me, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "You seem different," she said, her tone probing, as if she sensed something was off but couldn't put her finger on it. I just smiled. "Maybe I've finally accepted things as they are," I said, watching her carefully. "I realized last night that maybe I've been holding on to a fantasy for too long. Trying to be the perfect husband, the understanding partner." I leaned back, crossing my arms as I watched her, knowing exactly where this was going. She smirked, sipping her coffee, clearly convinced she'd won. "Well, I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly, John. Life's too short to live by some ideal." "Exactly," I replied, nodding. "That's why I think it's time we had a little change. A fresh start." She gave me a curious look, and I could tell she thought she'd won this war of wits. "In fact, I think you'll find this interesting," I added, reaching into my pocket to pull out the USB drive. I set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it, frowning. "What's this?" "Oh, just a little something I found. Consider it a gift." I leaned in, my voice low. "It's amazing, really, all the things we hide, thinking no one will ever discover them. But secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they?" Her face paled as she picked up the drive, turning it in her fingers. "What are you talking about? Why don't you take a look?" I replied, nodding toward the laptop on the counter. "Let's go through it together." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the drive. "John, I don't know what you think you found, but—" "No more excuses," I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm done with them, Madison. It's time you face the truth." She looked like she wanted to throw the drive across the room, but instead, she took a slow, measured breath and crossed over to the laptop. With a few clicks, she pulled up the files, her face shifting from anger to shock as image after image, message after message filled the screen. I watched her crumble, saw her attempt to pull together excuses, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, let's just say I ran into an old friend of yours," I replied, enjoying the way her eyes widened. "Funny how things have a way of catching up to you, isn't it?" She turned to me, her expression a mix of horror and defiance. "So, what now? You think you're going to get some kind of revenge? Hurt me like I hurt you?" I shrugged, my voice casual. "Not exactly. Hurting you would be too easy, Madison. You've lived your life manipulating people, convincing everyone you're something you're not. But you know what I realized last night? You're nothing without that image, without people believing you're some flawless, innocent woman. I'm going to take that from you." She laughed, but it was shaky, uncertain. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, John. I smiled, pulling out my phone. I already did. I hit play, and her own voice echoed from the phone, a recording of our confrontation the night before, of her admitting everything, mocking me, blaming me for her affair. Every word was clear, undeniable. Her face drained of color as the recording played. "You recorded me?" Her voice was a whisper. "Every word," I replied, tucking my phone back in my pocket. "I sent it to a few friends, just in case anything should happen to the original." "You wouldn't," she spat, anger flashing in her eyes. "You'd ruin us both." "Maybe. But here's the thing, you're the one with everything to lose, Madison. Your reputation, your friends, your career, everything you've built on lies. I'm ready to walk away from all of it. Are you?" Her expression shifted, a mask of panic mixed with fury. "What do you want, John?" she asked, each word laced with contempt. I leaned forward, my tone deadly calm. "You're going to leave, Madison. Walk away from this house, from me, from our friends. You're going to tell everyone you're moving for work, or that you need some time alone, I don't care. But you're leaving, and you're doing it today." She gaped at me, searching for some hint of mercy, but I held her gaze, unflinching. "And if I refuse?" she said, her voice barely audible. "Then the whole world sees you for who you really are," I replied, feeling a strange satisfaction in the certainty of my words. "I'll make sure everyone knows. And let's be clear, if you try to twist this, try to blame me or claim I'm the unstable one, that recording goes public. You won't have a life left to manipulate." For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She was cornered, and she knew it. She couldn't twist her way out, couldn't charm her way back. This time, the consequences were real. She glanced around the room, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "Fine," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "You win, John." I leaned back, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. "It's not about winning, Madison. It's about ending this game. And now, it's over." She stormed off to pack her things, and within an hour, she was gone. I watched as her car disappeared down the road, the house finally silent, free of her lies. The chaos, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it was all behind me now. And in its place was an unexpected calm, a feeling of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I sat down at the kitchen table, alone, realizing that everything I thought I'd needed, everything I'd fought so hard to keep, was nothing but a lie. And as the morning sun streamed through the windows, I felt a strange sense of peace, a chance to rebuild, not on lies, but on something real. I poured myself a cup of coffee, staring out the window, knowing I'd survived the worst of it. Madison was out of my life, her power over me shattered. And as I took my first sip, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready to face it. A week had passed since Madison left, and the silence in the house felt almost eerie, like a calm after a storm that you can't fully trust. I was still piecing my life back together, sifting through old memories, throwing out reminders of a life that had been based on deception. But the strangest part of it all? I wasn't angry anymore. Just empty. One evening, I sat on the couch, absently scrolling through my phone when an email notification flashed across the screen. The subject line was short and strange: "Do you really think it's over?" There was no sender name, just an email address I didn't recognize. I opened it, and a chill ran down my spine. "You may have kicked Madison out, but don't think for a second that she's going to let you off that easy. She's got more secrets than you know, John. Secrets that could ruin you, too. She's coming back, and this time, she's going to take everything." A friend. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Who was this friend? And what did they mean by Madison coming back? She'd left, tail between her legs, she wouldn't dare show her face here again. Or would she? I tried to shrug it off, but as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched, like Madison's ghost was lurking around every corner, ready to pounce. I started noticing small things out of place in the house, a door that I was certain I'd locked, slightly ajar. A faint smell of her perfume lingering in the hallway, so strong it made me question if she'd somehow snuck back in while I was out. It was ridiculous, impossible, and yet. Then, one night, it happened. I was in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard a soft creak downstairs. I sat up, listening. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My heart pounded as I slipped out of bed, grabbing the bat I'd started keeping beside me since that eerie email. I crept down the stairs, each step slow and silent. In the darkness, shadows stretched across the walls, twisting in eerie patterns. My mind raced with possibilities, every dark corner hiding a threat. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw her. Madison, standing in the living room, her back to me, staring at the family photos on the wall. She looked almost ghostly, her hair disheveled, her clothes a mess, like she hadn't slept in days. She turned around slowly, her eyes cold, empty of any remorse or emotion. "Surprised to see me?" she said, a twisted smile spreading across her face. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, gripping the bat tightly. She laughed, that same mocking laugh that used to cut through every argument we'd ever had. "Oh, John, did you really think I'd just leave? Walk away and let you ruin my life? Not a chance." She took a step toward me, her eyes gleaming with something dark, almost deranged. "You're trespassing," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my insides were churning. "Leave, Madison, or I'll call the police." She just shrugged, unfazed. "Go ahead. But I don't think they'll believe a word you say. You think you're the only one who kept evidence?" She held up her phone, showing me a screen full of messages. Messages I supposedly sent, confessing to things I'd never done. Photos of me in situations that, to any outsider, would look questionable. Every image, every message, carefully crafted to make me look like the bad guy. What is this?" I stammered, my mind reeling. "Proof, John," she said, smiling wider. "Proof that you're not who everyone thinks you are. It's amazing what a little editing can do. You ruined my life, so I'm going to ruin yours, one lie at a time." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd planned this. The recordings, the photos, everything had been a setup, a way to twist the story if she ever needed it. And now, she was using it against me, turning the knife that she'd planted all along. But instead of feeling panic, a strange clarity settled over me. She might have her lies, her tricks, but I wasn't the same man who'd let her walk all over me. I'd come too far, endured too much to let her take me down now. "Go ahead, Madison," I said, my voice low, controlled. "Take your shots. Show your little proof to whoever you want. But we both know the truth, don't we? That you're a lying, manipulative monster who can't stand being outsmarted." She sneered, clearly thrown off by my calm. "You think anyone's going to believe you? I have everything I need to bury you, John. Your job, your reputation, even your friends, they'll all turn their backs once they see what I have." "Maybe," I replied, my voice cold. "But then again, maybe they'll see through you the way I finally did." For the first time, she looked uncertain, like the reality of my resistance was sinking in. She was used to controlling everyone around her, used to people bending to her will. But not this time. Not anymore. She took a step back, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "You're bluffing," she hissed, her voice wavering. "Am I?" I said, taking a step closer. "You can't break what's already broken, Madison. You've already taken everything I cared about. All that's left now is for me to make sure you never hurt anyone else." I saw a flash of fear in her eyes before she masked it with a smirk. "You think you're so clever," she spat. "But I'll be back, John. You can't keep me out forever." I nodded, the finality of it settling in. "Then I'll be waiting." With one last glare, she turned and left, slamming the door behind her. I locked it, double-checked every window, and sank into the couch, feeling a weight lift off me. I wasn't scared anymore. She'd lost her power over me. And no matter what lies she spread, I knew the truth. As I sat in the quiet of the empty house, I realized that this battle was finally over, not because she was gone, but because I'd taken back control. She could try all the tricks she wanted, but I wasn't the same man who'd fallen for her lies. I'd won, not by beating her at her own game, but by refusing to play it altogether. In the days after Madison's visit, I thought about every word she'd said, every threat she'd tried to wield like a weapon. But the shock of her twisted plan had worn off, replaced by something stronger, a resolve that, if she was going to try to ruin me, I'd be ready. Then, just as I was starting to settle into this strange, new life, I got a call that flipped everything on its head. It was from a man named Evan, someone I'd never met but whose name Madison had mentioned once or twice in passing, always in casual, unremarkable ways. He introduced himself briefly, his voice tense, strained, and he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "John," he said, barely pausing for breath. "We need to talk about Madison. There's something you need to know, and you're not going to like it." I nearly laughed. "You mean, aside from the fact that she's a pathological liar?" He didn't join in. "No. This is bigger than you think." I didn't want to reach out, but she's crossed a line. "What line?" I asked, a familiar dread creeping in. He took a shaky breath. "I was her. I guess you could call it her partner in crime," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We worked together to manipulate people. To blackmail them, to extort them. She used our relationship as a cover to ruin people's lives. But when she turned on me, I realized I was just another pawn in her game. I left it alone for years, but she's gotten more ruthless. And she's planning to drag you down like she's done to everyone else." I froze, trying to process what he was saying. I had no idea that Madison's games went so deep, that there was a whole underground network to her twisted ways. But Evan wasn't done. "She's been watching you, John," he continued. "Since the day she left, she's been tracking everything you do, preparing for this moment. You might think she's gone, but she's not. She's waiting, looking for the right time to strike." The words hit like a sledgehammer. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, skepticism creeping into my voice. "Because I want out, John," he replied, sounding defeated. "I'm tired of running, tired of being her puppet. But I also want her to pay for what she's done. She's a threat to everyone she meets, and I can't watch her destroy another life. Not again." I took a breath, struggling to keep my composure. This was a trap, had to be, but there was a sincerity in his voice I couldn't ignore. "And what do you want from me?" "Meet me," he said. "Tonight. I'll show you everything, emails, photos, videos. Proof of what she's done, of how she set people up, ruined them. But I need your word that you're serious about stopping her. Because once she knows we've talked, there's no going back." Against my better judgment, I agreed, feeling the pull of something I couldn't ignore. I couldn't turn my back on this. If what he said was true, then Madison was far worse than I'd imagined, and leaving it alone was no longer an option. Later that night, I drove to the address Evan had given me. It was a grimy, abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of place where nothing good ever happened. I parked and waited, feeling the weight of the decision I'd made settle heavily in my chest. There was still a part of me that didn't fully trust Evan. But I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. Evan arrived soon after, looking over his shoulder like he was being followed. He was a tall, thin man, with a nervous energy that put me on edge. He approached the car, and I motioned for him to get in. As soon as he was inside, he handed me a stack of papers and a flash drive. "Everything's in there," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Emails between her and me, and with other targets. Photos of her, messages she saved to use as blackmail. And, John, there's one more thing." I glanced at him, feeling a chill down my spine. "What?" "She's framing you, John. She's already started spreading lies, telling people you've been violent, unstable. She's got a whole story lined up. If you don't stop her now, she'll make sure you lose everything." My stomach dropped. She wasn't just ruining my reputation, she was building a case against me, painting me as the villain in a story she'd written herself. And if Evan was telling the truth, then this was just the beginning. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and began scrolling through the files, one after another. Each document, each message, painted a picture of a woman who was disturbingly calculated, a woman who could twist anyone's life to suit her needs. There were transcripts of her conversations with other victims, emails where she outlined her plans to get money, sympathy, power, all by manipulating people who trusted her. I felt sick. This wasn't just betrayal, this was a level of evil I hadn't thought possible. "So, what's your plan?" I asked Evan, my voice hoarse. He took a deep breath. "I want to go public with it all. Expose her for what she is. But I can't do it alone. I need you to back me up, to confirm everything. Together, we can make sure she never does this to anyone again." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Madison had ruined lives and moved on without a scratch for too long. But this time, she wouldn't get away. Before we parted ways, Evan gave me a burner phone, promising to stay in touch, and I agreed to meet him in a few days to finalize our plan. I watched him walk away, feeling a glimmer of hope that maybe, finally, we'd put an end to Madison's reign of terror. But just as I was about to leave, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I picked it up, and there was a pause on the other end before a familiar, chilling voice spoke. "So, you met Evan, didn't you?" Madison's voice was calm, almost amused. "Did he tell you his little story? Did he make you feel like the hero?" My heart sank. She'd been watching us. She knew everything. "Your game is over, Madison," I replied, my voice steady. "People are going to know what you've done." She laughed, cold and mocking. "Oh, John. You're so naive. I've spent my whole life outsmarting people like you and Evan. And trust me, you don't want to go to war with me. Walk away now, and I might consider sparing you." I gripped the phone, her words echoing in my head, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Do your worst, Madison. I'm not afraid of you anymore." The line went silent for a second before she spoke, her tone deadly. "Oh, you will be, John. You will be." The call ended, and I sat there in the silence, the weight of her threat hanging in the air. She was planning something bigger than I'd realized. And now, it was a race to see who could strike first. But this time, I wasn't alone. And this time, I was ready. In the days that followed, I prepared for the inevitable showdown with Madison. I'd underestimated her ruthlessness, and I wasn't about to make that mistake again. I knew she would go to any length to protect her secrets, to save herself from the fallout. But now, I had allies. Evan was in regular contact, and he'd pulled in a third player, a private investigator named Sarah, someone he trusted, someone who had already seen Madison's destruction up close. Sarah didn't waste any time. We met at a dimly lit diner late one evening, the air thick with smoke and the smell of coffee that had probably been brewing for days. She slid a thick folder across the table toward me, her face unreadable. "I've been on Madison's trail for a while," she said, her voice quiet but steady. What you're dealing with goes deeper than you think, John. This woman doesn't just ruin lives, she erases them. I opened the folder and was greeted with a collection of photos and documents, each one detailing people Madison had taken down, a business partner she'd framed for embezzlement, a friend she'd blackmailed into near bankruptcy, and another former lover who'd vanished under suspicious circumstances. Is this even real? I muttered, my voice barely audible. I knew Madison was manipulative, but this? This was a level of cruelty I hadn't imagined. Oh, it's real, Sarah replied, her tone grim. Madison knows how to hide, how to cover her tracks. And she's had a lot of practice. She leaned forward, eyes sharp. If we're going to bring her down, we'll need to be smarter than she is. Evan nodded, his expression tense. We can't just expose her. She's too slippery. She'll twist every word, spin every piece of evidence. We need a confession, something undeniable. I shook my head, feeling the weight of the task ahead. How do we get that? She's careful, Evan. She'll never admit anything unless she thinks she's in control. Sarah smiled, a spark of confidence in her eyes. Exactly. Which is why we're going to let her think she is. Her plan was deceptively simple, almost brilliant. We would lure Madison into thinking I was on the verge of collapse, broken, and ready to bargain. She knew how to play people's weaknesses, and if we gave her a reason to believe I was vulnerable, she would come running. We'd get her to a neutral location, one she'd think was safe, and capture every word on tape. The stage was set, and the following night, I sent Madison a message from a new number, the desperation in the text unmistakable. I'm done fighting, Madison. You win. Just tell me what you want. I waited, tension buzzing through every nerve. I knew she'd bite, and sure enough, within minutes, her response came through. Tomorrow. 7 p.m. The old warehouse by the docks. Come alone. I felt a twisted satisfaction reading her message. The warehouse was perfect, isolated, with cameras Sarah had planted earlier. Madison was playing right into our hands. The next evening, I arrived early, setting up in the shadows with Evan and Sarah in a control room nearby, ready to capture every word. The cold, damp air seeped through my jacket as I waited, heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. I didn't know what Madison would say, but this was our last shot to expose her for who she really was. At exactly 7 p.m., her footsteps echoed through the empty space, sharp and deliberate. She walked toward me with that same smug, unbreakable confidence, a predator who thought she'd already won. She was dressed in black, her expression icy and calculating. You finally see things my way, don't you, John? She said, folding her arms, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. All you had to do was stop fighting. Would have saved us both a lot of trouble. I swallowed, playing the part. I don't want any more trouble, Madison. I just want peace. I can't keep up with this fight. She laughed, a cold, mocking sound. Oh, John. I broke you faster than I thought. I didn't even need to try. She tilted her head, studying me. You were always so predictable. That's why I never bothered taking you seriously. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Why did you do it, Madison? Why tear people down like this? What do you get out of it? She gave me a pitying look. What I get out of it? Power, John. Control. You were so easy to manipulate, just like all the others. And if you hadn't pried, if you'd just played your role, none of this would have happened. Her arrogance was infuriating, but I kept my voice steady. So, what now? You think you can just walk away? She smirked, tapping her finger against her chin. Actually, yes. I think I can. Because the only evidence you have is what I've allowed you to find. And when this is all over, I'll make sure everyone believes you're the one who lost it, who couldn't handle the end of a marriage." She took a step closer, her voice a venomous whisper. "You'll be nothing. And I'll move on, just like I always do." That's when Sarah's voice crackled over my earpiece. "Now, John. Push her." I steadied myself, taking a step closer to Madison. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? That no one will ever believe what you've done?" She laughed, rolling her eyes. "Please, John. I've perfected this. I know how to make people disappear, how to ruin their lives without a trace." Her voice dropped to a low hiss. "Just like I did with Evan, just like I did with everyone else who crossed me." I took a deep breath, barely able to contain my rage. "And you think you'll get away with it? That people will just believe your lies forever?" Her smirk faded, her face twisting into something darker. "I know I will," she sneered. "Because I've been getting away with it for years. You're just another fool who fell for the same tricks. You thought you could beat me, but look at you now. Pathetic." That's when I nodded, signaling to Sarah. A soft click sounded from above, and a voice echoed through the warehouse, a recording of Madison's words, everything she'd just admitted. Her face paled as she realized what was happening, her eyes darting to the source of the sound. You recorded me?" She stammered, a mix of shock and fury contorting her face. "Every word," I replied, unable to suppress a small, victorious smile. "It's over, Madison." She backed away, her expression shifting from anger to desperation. "You won't get away with this, John. I'll destroy you. I'll—" "No, Madison," I interrupted, my voice steady. "For the first time, you're the one who's been played." As Sarah and Evan emerged from the shadows, Madison's fury melted into pure, unfiltered panic. She stumbled, her confidence shattered, realizing there was no way out. Every carefully constructed lie, every cruel manipulation, had unraveled in a matter of minutes. She'd lost control, and for the first time, she knew it. She lunged at me, desperation flashing in her eyes. "This isn't over," she screamed. "I'll make you pay. I'll make all of you pay." But her words fell on deaf ears. We watched as she crumbled, her web of lies collapsing around her. And as we walked out of the warehouse, leaving her to face the consequences of her own actions, a weight lifted from my shoulders, the weight of years of lies finally gone. It was over. She was over. And as I walked into the dawn of a new day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Freedom. In the weeks that followed Madison's meltdown at the warehouse, it was as if the whole twisted mess was finally unraveling around her, piece by piece. The recordings we'd captured, along with all the evidence from Evan and Sarah, were more than enough to expose Madison's lies and manipulations. Slowly, the people she'd wronged began to see her for who she really was, a fraud, a master manipulator who preyed on trust and left ruin in her wake. But Madison didn't go quietly. Her threats turned into desperate attempts to salvage her reputation. She called everyone she could, spinning tales of my supposed obsession, her voice laced with panic, her stories growing more bizarre with each call. She tried playing the victim, but with the truth spreading fast, it was too late. People stopped picking up, friends and allies went silent, and soon enough, Madison found herself without the support she'd always taken for granted. Evan and I watched it unfold from the sidelines, both of us knowing the damage she'd caused was finally catching up to her. We met once more at that same diner, each of us bearing a strange sense of peace that came with seeing justice done. He thanked me, his voice steadier than I'd ever heard it, and we both agreed it was time to move on. But just when I thought it was all over, I received one last message from Madison. A handwritten note left at my doorstep, scrawled hastily and smeared, as though written in a fit of anger. "You may think you've won, but remember this, I don't go down without a fight. You've taken everything from me, and you will regret this. I'm not done, John. Not by a long shot. There it was, the final, desperate words of a woman who refused to face the truth, even as it stared her down. But this time, the threat didn't shake me. I knew she was out of moves, out of allies, and too far gone to piece together another scheme. Her words were empty, her power finally broken. And I decided, right then and there, that her last attempt at revenge would be met with nothing but silence. Months passed, and as time went on, Madison's name began to fade. People stopped whispering about her, the scandal dulled, and her influence disappeared. She was just another face, another person who had tried and failed to manipulate those around her. One quiet evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a strange kind of gratitude, a bittersweet appreciation for the journey I'd been forced to take. Madison had tried to tear my life apart, but in the process, she'd shown me something invaluable. She'd forced me to find strength I never knew I had, to reclaim control over my life, and to value the truth above all else. I wasn't the same man she'd once manipulated so easily. I was stronger, wiser, and no longer haunted by her shadow. As the final light faded, I realized I didn't hate her. I didn't fear her. She was a chapter of my past, one that had been closed for good. And as I took a deep breath, the quiet settling over me like a warm blanket, I knew I was finally free. Bye for now.